Welcome to Complementary Angles. My name is Michelle Green, Instructional Content Coach on the elementary math team.
And I'm also on the math team here at ESC Region 11. My name's Caitlin Cook.
And we are so excited that you are joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about formative assessments and all things that go along with that.
Yeah, and also diving a little bit into formative assessments versus summative assessments. I'm going to kind of kick us off with a question that I would like the listeners to kind of think about. What comes to mind when you hear the word assessment?
Ooh, that's a great question. For me, when I think of assessment, my first thought goes to like end of the year assessment, kind of like how has the student grown through the course of the entire year. So like a final assessment that gets ready to like transition them on to whatever grade level's next or whatever course might be next.
Okay. I feel like I kind of like go back in time to when I was an elementary math student, and I think of like paper pencil test, time test, unit assessments. Those are kind of like what just pops up in my head originally.
Lots of true false. I remember growing up, I had lots of assessments that had true false questions. Those were always a little tricky.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think assessment, kind of how can we see how we're doing, how students are doing, how they're learning, what they're learning, are they ready for what's next? Do we need to revisit anything? So really kind of having that evidence of learning, so to speak. So thinking about assessments, as we stated in the beginning, that this podcast is going to be a lot about formative assessment. So when you think about formative assessment and also summative assessment, what would you say is similar between the two?
So some similarities between formative and summative assessment are that they're both intentional. They should be planned. They can both help you to determine next steps in learning. And then they both collect data.
That's a good one. I think that when we formative assess like throughout the whole process, and then we summative assess at the end, but they should also be aligned to one another as well.
There are a lot of similarities there as well.
So what would you say would be some main differences between the two? So if we're thinking about the two of them, how do they stand apart from each other?
So formative assessment should be happening a lot more frequently, first of all, than summative assessment, right? We really want it to be ongoing. We want to continually provide feedback to our students. It's typically like a lower stakes for our students to engage in a formative assessment. And to me, for formative assessment, you're looking at progress, where a summative to me is you're assessing proficiency. So when you go into the summative, it's a little bit typically when you think back to like end of year testing or end of unit testing, those are a little bit like higher stakes. Like when you think about it, there's typically a grade that's assigned to that, and it might be worth more than formative assessment grades or other grades that you would get during class. And it's a longer term evaluation. And I think of either like providing that big grade or like almost like a label. Like, they have some like testing now where it might grade you on proficiency within a concept. Like, in geometry you rated in this range, meaning you're a high to medium, or where you start seeing some of those labels.
Yeah, and those labels, those are hard too, because it's just like a one moment in time that on that particular day, at that particular time, it highlights what the students knew at that moment. But I don't feel like it always gives a clear picture of where the students truly are in their learning and in their progression of learning. And so summative assessments for me can be a little tricky because it can be a little misleading. Some of it because sometimes the way we word questions or we ask questions or we assess may not truly give us that big picture, whereas formative assessment helps me to get a clearer picture overall. So when I formative assess, I can do it in so many different ways, and I can use different perspectives and different angles, that I feel like that helps me to really know where each of the students are at as it progresses to what that summative assessment. So if I feel like if I put them together, I get a really clear picture. But if I don't have them and they're not aligned and they're not working together, then I feel like I just have a couple snaps snapshots, and sometimes that snapshot isn't truly accurate in where the students are in their learning.
I feel like when you were talking just now, I was thinking of the word summative assessment, and it made me think of like hard data, right? Like the sharp numbers.
Yes.
And like you said, it's just like however they do on that particular day in that particular moment. Whereas like formative assessment, to me, it's a lot more of a process where there's a lot of questioning involved and probing and really trying to get a deeper understanding of what students think. And kind of their learning in that process of formative assessment.
I agree with you on that. So some of the reasons why we formative assess. So why do we want to have these ongoing assessments leading up to the summative? Is one, we want to help develop assessment-capable learners.
Yeah.
And assessment-capable learners that can verbalize what they are learning. Like we want the students to be able to talk about what they are learning in their own words. We also want them to be able to understand why they're learning and what they are learning. And we feel like if students can verbalize what they're learning, why they're learning it, and what that learning is, then that will help develop them as assessment-capable learners.
The intentionality behind why it's important, right? Like
Absolutely.
It's a little bit of buy-in there as well.
Yeah, and something else too, I think formative assessment allows students to do is begin to self-assess, like where they are in their own understanding, and then begin to determine what their next steps may be and what it is that they need from the instruction, from their teacher, and also what next steps they might need to help them in their own learning. Like for example, where is kind of where does the breakdown in learning happen? And when our students can identify that breakdown in learning and they can identify what might be needed next, then I feel like it helps them to grow overall in their learning.
Yeah, it's like they can almost pinpoint like what I need to do like to get from where I am to the goal of what I'm trying to learn.
It's like helping establish that why. And I think even as adults, like when I know like why I'm doing something and like what the purpose of it is, I'm more engaged, I'm more eager, I'm more ready, I'm more excited to do it because I know that the outcome is going to be something that I can celebrate.
So I also was thinking about what is your favorite formative assessment?
There's so many really good ones. I would say I'm actually going to put two together.
And is it going to look like paper and pencil?
I mean, it might require paper and it might require pencil, but it could be typed in paper. But so one is called Convince Me That. I really love this one because I feel like it really showcases the students in like where they're learning and how they're understanding or how they're able to display or demonstrate their learning. And so they can take something like a multiplication problem and they can convince you that the product is what it is through multiple representations, through words, through images, through graphics. I mean, you name it, whatever their learning is. But if you take that and they have to convince you that that is the right answer. So we're giving the students the right answer. We're not making them guess what the solution is. We're saying this is the solution, but I need you to convince me that this solution is correct. And so when students can do that, then they're able to kind of draw on like that why. But then if we pair that convince me that with a snowball fight, this is called a lot of different things, but we're going to refer to it as a snowball fight. So take that piece of paper that they might have wrote on with pencil or matte pencils or crayons, and they wad it up, right? They just wad it up. And they stand up, and on the count of three, everybody just throws these snowballs, and it's like a big snowball fight. Then what happens is the students can pick up someone else's, and you can take the names off of it. And they can pick it up, and they can unwad this snowball. That's kind of oxymoron right there, right? And so anyway, so they unwad this snowball, and then what they get to do is they get to share out somebody else's thinking and somebody else's convincing, which might look the same as theirs, it might look different. And then the discussions can really just fly from there because they can compare and contrast. It's a safe place because they're not sharing theirs, but they're also getting some immediate feedback on theirs, like how similar is this to what I was coming up with. So Convince Me That paired with a snowball fight, super engaging, lots of fun, low risk, but can really give the teacher some great data at where her students are at. What about you?
One that I like that made me think of this, because you compare this with Convince Me That as well, is Who Do You Think Like? But you don't have to. Teachers could select 2 or 3 students' work from that class, or she can even provide examples that she self-creates and ask the question. It's a fully worked out problem and says, which one of these do you most think like and why? I love this because it really fosters that flexibility in thinking, and they kind of have to think about, how did I approach it? How did this person approach it? How are what we're doing similar? How's what we're doing different? Mm-hmm. And then from all of these tasks, or all of these formative assessments that we've listed so far, I'm really thinking on the teacher's end, how you can see what strategies your students are already using. And that really shows you a lot about, maybe I should lean into this strategy because they're noticing that it's very efficient. Or, there is an efficient strategy that I'm not seeing a lot of that maybe I can bring into a number talk, or I can demonstrate in class soon. So it really gives you a lot of that data from these so far. And then one other one that I like is justified list. So you go through a list of different things. Like one that pops into my head is, which one of these demonstrates multiplication? And you can have a ton of different strategies displayed, number lines, pictorial representations, and the students go through and they have to decide if it is or is not multiplication, and they have to justify their reasoning. So really going back to that verbalizing thinking there. And then to me, this is an assessment as learning opposed to just an assessment of learning.
So the justified list reminds me of like an enhanced version of true false.
Yeah.
So like kind of what I did when I was in elementary school now is it's a more engaging strategy that still gets to the heart of why this could be a true representation or why this might be a false representation. I love that. I love that each one of these seem to promote some mathematical discourse in the classroom, and I feel like that is something really great. Like when we can hear students talking about math and doing the math and seeing themselves as mathematicians, that's exciting.
And one other thing I'd like to point out is all of these that we listed really brings student discovery to the forefront, and they are discovering strategies and thinking about, that was a lot quicker and easier than what I did by looking at each other's approaches. So the teacher never had to tell the students, hey, use this efficient strategy because it's quicker.
Well, yeah, because they learn so well from each other. Like they like to see themselves in each other as far as like what connections can they make, and someone did it like this. I didn't even think about that. And so then it's like they give themselves permission to begin to think outside the box or to begin to think a little bit differently. So that's great.
There is something that we really should be thinking about doing though while we're delivering a formative assessment, and that is, why is questioning so important when you're delivering a formative assessment to your students?
That is a great question. Because you just hit on this, that during these examples of formative assessments that we just talked about, that the teacher is not telling the students, that the students are discovering. And I feel like the questions are what promotes that. I feel like the questions that we ask, and questions may also be prompts, such as like, well, how do you know? Tell me more about that. Why do you think that? So questions that really get to maybe the metacognition behind the task, and really questions that allow for students to respond, but isn't so pinpointed that there's a right or wrong answer, or a yes or no, or that this is it or this is not it, but questions that allow the students to continue on that path of that discovery of the learning, and that path of making the connections of the mathematics. And I feel like the questions are something that can be very open-ended, that allow the students and the teachers to really begin to provide that feedback, and to ask clarifying questions too. Like the students can also question back, and that questioning back and forth really develops this relationship between the teachers, and helps to see that as learners that we're partnerships together. But what do you think would be the answer to that question, or what are your thoughts on why questioning is so important during formative assessments?
Forces students to think, right? Like, aren't we all trying to get there? We want students to think. And like you said, some of those, not like a pointed question like, hey, is this right or wrong? Like, how do you know this is right or wrong? Is like a question that could foster them to think and verbalize, again, going back to that verbalization, explaining their strategies. I think those are crucial, right? To making the connections between their work and another student's work. How is this similar? How is this different? Just really forces students to think and respond mathematically.
And to build on that, it's whenever the pencil, when you ask a good question is when the pencil can stay in the hand of the student. So if you find yourself like taking the pencil or whatever that utensil is and you begin to like show them, that's a great opportunity for you to pause and go, you know what, I'm going to set this pencil down and I'm going to think of a really good question so that I want you to think through this, and I'm going to be here to guide you through that. Mm-hmm. So we talked about formative assessment, and earlier we said that we might, how this could lead into some summative assessments. So how would you describe the relationship from formative assessments building over to summative assessments?
So I want you to kind of think of a typical summative assessment question that you might see on an end-of-year assessment.
Okay.
So right now, typically those are a question, it's a problem, right? A word problem with maybe A, B, C, D answer choices. So if we think about some of those examples of formative assessment we listed, like justified list, those can build to that even though it's not presented in that same manner. Mm-hmm. The students will have the thinking behind, and they'll have a deeper level of thinking than what's just presented on an A, B, C, D answer choice problem.
I agree with that.
And then also like the who do you think, like to me that really, if you see those, which one is not correct, that kind of makes me think of that, because it's, they have to go and think through different strategies, all 4 different strategies, and work it all the way through to see which one is or is not correct.
Yeah.
So they're approaching it in a different way.
And sometimes we see assessment items that have descriptions as the A, B, C, D. Like this is the equation, this is the expression, this is the graph. Which one of these describes it? And so then the students have to like read through and decide which description best fits. So I think a justified list could be of that. It could also be like convince me that. And I think it could be any of those that could really help them, like you said, be thinkers of mathematics, be deeper thinkers of whatever it is that they are learning at that particular moment.
And then if they've participated in these formative assessments all year long, it's like they have that in their brain when they see this, like they have the thinking process there to rely on when they're approaching the problem.
I agree with that. So that leads us to our R11 challenge. So what do we got? What's our challenge for our listeners this time?
So our challenge is for you to try one new formative assessment. It could be one of the ones we mentioned today, which were justified list, who do you think like, snowball fight, and convince me that. Mm-hmm. So it could be one of those, and we will link how to do those in our description.
Okay.
So if you want to investigate those further, or feel free to investigate another formative assessment of your own and try it out. This is a growing learning process. If you can just try something new and see how it goes, that would be great. And if you would like to share how it went on social media with us, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
At R11 Math.
Yes.
We are so thankful that you have joined us today and that you are listening and growing along with us in this journey. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah.